Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jazakallah khairan. Welcome to. Oh, that's no good. I got the audio coming repeating. All right. Welcome. We got our first hiccup already. Well, that said, now at least I know, alhamdulillah, the audio is working. So, inshallah, everything should be working. Everything looks good from my end. Jazakallah khairan for joining. And today we're going to be going through, in my opinion, the jewel of the course, which is the miracle of the preservation of the Qur'an, which I personally find the most fascinating and powerful because it's all encompassing. That inshallah, at the end of this session, inshallah, you'll be able to not only experience the miracle for yourself, because that's one thing that we lack. That the previous generations before us were able to witness miracles with their own eye, whereas we were just left with a book and we're told it's a miracle, but very few of us are able to experience that miracle and to see it for what it is. We're told it's a miracle, we're indoctrinated to believe it's a miracle, it's something special, but in reality, for most of us, it's just a book. It's not on the same scale as some of the fascinating sights that other generations would have seen. Not that fascinating and scary as well. Obviously, fire raining down from the sky, and the plagues of Egypt, and other things like that would have been quite. Assalamu alaikum. Would have been quite scary to see. So I'm not saying everything was like a show or anything like that, but you get what I mean, that at least the people there had something to witness with their own eyes. They could say, yeah, okay, definitely, so this person is definitely a messenger of God. Whereas the Quran is unique in that sense that it's something that we've been left with, but how many of us can actually experience the miracle in and of itself? Plus, also, once we demonstrate the miracle of the Quran as well, that in terms of demonstrating the truth, the proof of Islam as a whole, the Quran is able to do the whole thing, because via the Quran you can obviously demonstrate that there is a creator, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala necessarily exists, and also the messengership of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's actually an all-encompassing thing, which is why, in my opinion, the topic of the Quran, the preservation of the Quran, the miracle of the Quran, is the jewel of the whole course. So that said, inshallah, we've got a lot to get through. Let's get started. Bi'ithnillahi ta'ala. So we have, the preserved message. Okay, bismillah. So let's start from basics again. So first question is, why do we need a message? Okay, now bear in mind, up until this point in the course, we've gone through the akhlaq of that, things like that, and epistemology. And at this point, we've only established that there is a creator. There is a necessary divine reality that brought our existence into existence. Okay, that brought our reality, created our reality, created everything, us and everything else. There must have been a divine reality to have all of that realized. Okay, so that's the only thing that we've established thus far. We've also established various qualities and characteristics that are necessary of this creator. We did that in the last week's session. So one of the things that we established is that the divine reality, our creator, is necessarily, obviously, intelligent, because we can derive that by virtue of the nature of the creation itself. Now, we also know from our own experiences, we don't need to be taught this, we know from our own experiences that intelligent beings don't do things without purpose. Okay, that an intelligent being, and we're not even just talking about like supremely clever. We're talking about literally something that's not a machine, something that has the ability to think, to choose. That to choose to do something, is the choice is always made with some degree of an underlying purpose. There's a will there, there's an intention there. So the same applies to our creation, that we were created for a purpose. It wasn't an accidental thing. For example, it wasn't our creation can't be a byproduct. It's not an accident. There was a will and an intent for us and reality as a whole to have been created, as well in the manner in which it was created. So we don't do things without purpose. Why would we extrapolate or assume anything less for the creator? So there must have been a purpose for our creation. Now, the only way that we can know this is by being told. Now, as far as in terms of what we can derive about things through conceptual analysis just from thinking, we've kind of almost gone to the limits. Basically, to know anything more, for example, to know our own purpose, we need to be told what our purpose actually is. and that requires some kind of a message being given to us. Now, why can't we choose our purpose for ourselves? Because it's not the nature of a created thing to determine its own purpose, because something was created with a purpose already in mind. That's the reason for creation. There's a purpose in mind, and then something is created to fit that purpose. Nobody, particularly intelligent beings, don't create things and then determine a purpose for it afterwards. That it's created to resolve some kind of an issue, even exploration, even just some people might say, well, someone created something and they didn't know what to do with it, and then found a use for it. Yeah, but the point was that they created that thing with an intention in mind. Regardless of whether the intention changed, the point was that that thing was created to conform or to resolve some kind of an intention. The created thing itself never gets to choose what it wants to be. So, for example, my chair here that I'm sitting on cannot decide that it wants to become a ballerina. It has no ability to do that. This table that all of my equipment is resting on cannot decide to become an aeroplane and start flying around. It is designed for a purpose. It's going to be used for that purpose. Okay, does that make sense? So it doesn't get to choose for itself. So we need some kind of communication from our creator. We need some kind of revelation, so to speak, from our creator to know what our purpose is. So that answers the question is why do we need a message? Now the problem is there are many documents, there are many artifacts, there are many different messages that claim to be from God. People will say God spoke to them or what have you. People say that this XYZ document or book or whatever have you is from God. There are many claimed messages that claim to be from the divine reality, from our creator. And obviously, necessarily that they all contradict in some fundamental way. Otherwise, if they were the same, they would be the same one message. So there is some necessary fundamental contradictions between them, and we need to be able to have some kind of a mechanism to work out what is the truth, what is the reality, what is the true message, and what is that which is fake, what has mankind invented and made up, so to speak. Okay, so we need to understand first and foremost what are the qualities of an authentic message. Okay, so an authentic message must be examinable. Okay, you have to be able to examine the message for yourself, or have any other third party or whatever have you be able to examine it. You have to be able to subject that message to some degree of scrutiny, because if you're unable to check, to scrutinize the message, you have no basis to affirm the authenticity of it. Now let's give you guys an example of a check. Okay, I know it's a little bit outdated now. These slides were created many years ago. I mean, they were outdated then, but as a mechanism, when we deal with money, right, the human mind, it sharpens when we deal with money. So a check, a personal check, a bank check. Now imagine if I went into your bank and I said to your bank manager that Fulan said I can have all of his money. Okay, and the bank manager said, yeah, okay, fine, and just gave me all of the money, right? Gave me all of your money. Would you guys be happy with that? Obviously not. Okay, it makes absolutely no sense. And the first thing that you will be saying is like, where's your proof? Where's your evidence? Where is something written down? Okay, so unless there is something written down, it's like how because you'll just say, well, how do you know I said that? There's no evidence of this. Right, you need an evidence. Okay, fine. Testimony is a form of evidence, but especially when it comes to your money, you want something stronger than just testimony, right? Especially if you want something stronger than testimony. So you want something written down, at least something examinable, something that can be subjected to further tests. Okay, so that's where checks for a check to be valid, it has to be written down. You can't. Checks are not. They're only valid in a written form. You can't verbally go into a bank and actually say XYZ said to give me money. Okay, so an authentic message, it has to be examinable. Okay, you have to subject it to scrutiny. And this then automatically disqualifies things like, oh, I had a dream, I had a vision, I had a personal experience, or whatever have you, because those can never be regarded as authentic, because there's no way for anyone else to validate or invalidate it. Do you see what I mean? Because if you go down the route of saying, well, God spoke to me, God came to me in a dream, what is to stop anybody else claiming the exact same thing and saying something opposite to what you said? There's really no basis. There's no way that they can do that. right? Sorry, there's no way that you can stop them from doing that. So you're gonna have a problem in and of itself to begin with, and obviously an intelligent divine reality is not going to subject his creation to that, or their creation to that. Okay, so first quality is examinability. You must be able to examine it. Okay, the second quality is that the message itself must come with some degree of an authority. Okay, so just because a message says something, if it doesn't carry any degree of authority, then it cannot be authentic upon the entity which it claims to be from. Okay, I know that's very formal, but let's say let's break it down a little bit. So if I came into your bank and spoke to your bank manager, and I wrote down on a piece of paper that Fulan said I can have all of his money, but it's signed somebody else, XYZ, right? And the bank manager said, yes, fine. And he gave me all the money. Now, you might say, well, where was the evidence? Where was the proof? And the bank manager say, oh, look, it's written down here. And now the next thing you're going to do is say, well, that's not my signature. That's XYZ. That's somebody else who's saying that, and they have no authority to speak, on my behalf, for my money, for my regards. Okay, so it's like, I can't say to any one of you guys that, and even write it down and say, hey, guess what, guys, the Queen of England is going to give you guys a knighthood, because I have zero authority in the regard. So I can say whatever I like with regards to the Queen, and I can produce written evidence. Don't forget that it doesn't have to be valid, right? I can produce something in writing to say that the Queen of England is going to give you a knighthood. I mean, this is the basis on which many scams and cons are done. People produce fake documentation. The point being is, I have no authority. I have zero authority to be making any such kind of a statement in and of itself. So by virtue of the fact that this is coming from or attributed to a source that has zero ability to make any such statements, that that the message cannot be authentic on the Queen. Whatever I say, the Queen said to you, if I've got a personal message from the Queen for you, by virtue of the fact that I've got no authority in this regard, that anything that I say, regardless of the medium in which I present it, has zero authority on the Queen. Okay, because I'm just literally not in the position to be able to make that. Does that make sense? And again, the same with the check. The check needs to be from the owner or person who owns the bank account or has authority over the bank account, rather than any third individual person. So we have an authentic message needs to be examinable, and it needs to come and carry some degree of authority. Okay. Now, the third quality is that it needs to be untampered with. Okay, the message needs to be untampered with, in that we must have some degree of a mechanism to determine whether or not the message has changed. Because if I have made a message, created a message for somebody, and then somebody else changes that message, then the changed message that is transmitted is a forgery. It's not authentic. Okay, so as well as having the being examinable and having the authority, there must be some mechanism to determine whether that message has changed or not. Okay, so again, with the example of a check, if you were to give me a check, say for £10, and I changed that to £10,000 and the bank paid out on it, right? You would say, hold on, why did you give £10,000? Now they're going to say, well, here's a check. Number one, it's examinable. We can look at it, we can scrutinize it, we can test it. And now, because we can examine it, now you can say, they'll say, and if you examine it, if you look at it closely, you can see the second quality, authority. It's signed by you. It was issued by you. This check was issued by you. At which point then you can say, yes, but I issued it in the sum of £10, and this has been changed to £10,000, or dollars for our US visitors. It's a completely different amount. So this is not the same as what I actually issued. And this is why checks, you have to write it down in numbers, and you have to write the words out as well. It's an anti-tampering mechanism. So the point there being that only when you can examine the message, the message has come with authority, and you have a means to determine that the message itself is untampered with, i.e. it's the original. Only then, when these three things overlap, can you consider any message to be authentic. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And again, I'm not. The important thing to bear in mind here is that in terms of these qualities and criteria, we're not leaning towards anything favorable or unfavorable towards our end goal. This is just general, basic, qualities of any authentic message here. This is, so no one can claim that, oh well, we're being unfair and we're being deliberately manipulative of what the qualities are. What if someone said we use our mind to determine our eyes, hands, feet have purpose? Without revelation, we can decide what our purpose is without revelation. Well, no, we can't decide what our purpose is without revelation, because there's no way for you to validate that purpose. You can decide what you want to do with your life, but you can't determine yourself why you were created, because you weren't involved in your own creation, ultimately. And there's a difference. The basis behind your creation is ultimately different. It's a different point. It's a different concept to what you choose to do with the reality and the time that you have. So we need to be quite clear on what we mean, because a lot of confusion also comes down to semantics. People say, well, I determine my own purpose in life. I want to be XYZ. I want to be a famous rock star or whatever have you. Fine, you can choose to do that if you want with your life. But you were not created with the idea in mind that you are going to be a famous rock star. That's, even with your parents didn't get together and decide to conceive you and say, hey, should we make a baby who's going to be a famous rock? It never happens. So yeah, you don't get to choose. Okay. Right. So just as an example here, okay, we're only going to go through this. This is not intended to be like a Bible bashing session or anything like that. This is only purely as an example, because obviously most of the Western world is familiar with the Bible, just to understand the nature of these qualities, because you need to understand exactly what the qualities are in order to be able to understand the rest of the argument properly. So what was the first criteria again? What was the first criteria of the three? There should be there should be a logical order to it as well. So you should be able to recall it just because it makes sense, as it's the first necessary thing. So yep, examinability, right? You must be able to subject to examinability. Now, I would ask, is it possible to examine the Bible? What do you reckon? Is it possible to examine the Bible? Is it possible for someone to put an authentic Bible in your hands? Right? You would say yes. Okay. I'm going to disagree, and I'm going to say no. It's not possible to examine the Bible, because the problem is we have, when I say we, I mean mankind, not Muslims. Mankind, there are so many different versions and variations of the Bible that there is no such definitive copy. So there is no document that anyone in the world can place in your hand and say that this is the Bible, and everyone around the world who recognizes the Bible will agree that this is the Bible. Because then there's a case of, well, okay, what language is it? What books are there? I mean, okay, let's have a look at the biggest differences between them. It's like you've got the Catholic and the Protestant Bible, which differ by 6 books in between them, and then you've got the phrasing of certain verses, and like for example in Deuteronomy 18:18, in the voice of God speaking to Moses, says that I shall raise them up from among thy brethren a prophet like unto thee. Okay, brethren here talking about the brethren of the Jews being the Arabs, whereas in other variations, to get around this interpretation, they basically change this to I shall raise them up from among the Arabs, or from among themselves, or something else. It's a case of, well, what was the original word? Was it from thy brethren? Was it from yourselves? Was it from the Jews? Because these are 3 completely different, distinct terms. So which was the actual one that was used, and which one was changed from mankind? And that's just one example. There's so many of these different variations that it is impossible for anyone to actually put anything in your hand that, people who recognize the Bible around the world would say, yeah, okay, that's the Bible, and I'm going to stand behind that, every single word of it, without any difference. It just doesn't exist. So in that sense, it's not possible to examine the message, because there literally are countless variations of the message that nobody knows what the actual authentic original message is, first and foremost. Whereas with the Quran, now you can ask, is it possible to put a document in the hand of anyone, say this is the Quran, and all the Muslims around the world who recognize the Quran will affirm and attest to it? Absolutely yes, because every single copy of the Quran is identical. That's literally its nature and its characteristic, that they're all identical. Even the groups that the mainstream Muslims would consider heretics, there are groups of Muslims that consider that, okay, 9/10 of the original Quran have been destroyed. They were in praise of a particular figure, but they have been destroyed for political reasons, blah 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 blah. But even that group of people that thinks that the Quran has been tampered with will actually testify that the Quran that we have now, worldwide, is the Quran. It's a really weird belief that on one side they would argue tampering, to push their view, but then on the other side they also affirm and recognize that actually no, there is actually only one version without variations or anything like that. Okay, so the point here being that if someone wanted to examine the Quran, very easy. You can literally just go anywhere in the world you want and obtain a copy of the Quran, and it's going to be identical to every other version. Okay, that's why you can go to, for example, if you go to a Bible website and you want to see, what does a various verse say, you'll have so many different versions and variations in every single language. Well, this version says this version says that. Whereas if you want to understand what the Quran says, it'll be in Arabic. You'll have different translations, and the translation is not the Quran, but in the Arabic, they'll always be the same. It's always the one. So we know exactly what the Quran is. So in terms of the first criteria, we know that the Quran is examinable. Okay. Now, what was the second criteria? What do you guys remember? Second criteria was authority. Okay, great. Now, does the Bible claim authority? Does the Bible claim authority? Well, it basically says that yes, this is, from the divine. This is from your creator. You guys are probably going to say, well, if I say yes, he's just going to say no, and sure, I'm wrong again. Okay, so the Bible doesn't claim authority? It doesn't claim authority. Okay, I'm not a Bible expert. I don't know if at any point if it actually attempts to claim authority. I don't believe it does. I'm not aware of anything. But what I do know is that there are places where it literally does not claim authority. It literally makes statements which is the complete opposite of claiming authority. So, for example, in Luke chapter 1, verse 1 to 4, it basically states that this character, Luke, who, again, not their real name, we don't know the real name, whatever have you, exactly. So yeah, Luke, for example, does not claim to be inspired by God. It's not even a case of not claiming to be inspired by God. Luke specifically states that he's doing it off his own back. He's literally writing this account just because other people are writing accounts as well. So I've literally got the quote here, is that Luke basically says, the beginning of Luke says, many have undertaken, and obviously, again, this is one variation of it because there's no, true version. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who were who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the world. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most exis Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of things you have been taught. So literally Luke is there basically saying that I've just decided to write this from my own perspective. Okay, so again, completely negating the idea that this message, whatever is contained within it, even in some small part, is directly from the divine. There's somebody else's works here. Whereas, does the Quran, what about passages in the Old Testament where the prophets claim the word came to me from God? Isn't this claiming authority? Yeah, but the words that they're saying back, are the words that they're saying back literally the words of God, or is it their own interpretation? And that's the problem, that once you start having an interpretation, and then even then an interpretation, because you could also take the words from the messenger as well. For example, we have Hadith Qudsi, right? Which is hadith where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is supplying the words and the meaning. Where God is supplying the words and the meaning. So we can accept those because, again, we have the specific wording. The problem is when we start adding our own interpretations, we change a word here and we change a word there and whatever have you. And in doing that, the original has been lost because language at a specific degree of eloquence is multifunctional in that you can make very pithy statements. You can make a very short, concise statement which can have magnitudes and multitudes of meaning, which then get lost if people who don't understand language to the same depth decide to tamper with it. So no, that wouldn't count. Out of the passage of all scripture inspired by God. Well, inspired by God, what does that mean? Anything can be inspired, but it's not the words of God. It's not claimed to be from God. It's just claimed to. It's literally claimed it's the work of man, inspired by God. It's still the words of man. That's the point. That it's somebody else's. I mean, I can be inspired by the Queen's generosity to say that the Queen's going to give you a knighthood. That doesn't mean the Queen's going to do it. So just because inspiration hit me doesn't mean that anything that I say is authentic upon the Creator. Because at the end of the day, people say, oh, it's inspired by God, but how do they know? How do you test where did this inspiration come from? And that the inspiration didn't come from the devil, for example, And you might say, well, why do you believe in the devil? Well, if you believe in God and the Abrahamic theology, you'll believe in the devil as well. But the point there being, how do you know where the inspiration came from? Right? Anyway, so the point here being that the Bible never at any point claims for the whole thing to be authoritative on God. Yeah, they say this, but again, who knows what the Holy Spirit is? The Bible never claims anything to be authoritative on God, whereas the Qur'an does. The Qur'an basically takes, talks about the entire message holistically. So it claims authority there, that it's literally from God and only from God, and that is it. Okay. What was the third quality? Third characteristic? Third characteristic of an authentic message. Yeah, okay. Preserved, you can say preserved, untampered with. That basically, yes, the original message. Okay, I'll accept that. Okay, so again, I was going to ask, is the Bible preserved? But, by definition, being as there are so many different versions and variations, and even let's just say the authentic one on, Church of England, for example, whatever have you, or the Catholic Church, even the church themselves and other institutes have, removed and rejected books that were once considered canon, once considered part of the Bible, and then they've rejected and say, actually, there's no historical significance here whatsoever. The message itself has changed severely over time, where things have just been added and removed and whatever have you. That literally that process in and of itself demonstrates that the message has changed, that it's not the original message, that whatever we have today is not the same as what existed then. So there is no way that anyone can say, that anyone can claim that the Bible has been unchanged, whereas can we as Muslims argue that the Quran has been unchanged? For the most part, yes. There is a slight caveat, but which is what we're going to go through. But yeah, essentially, right now, every single copy of the Quran is identical. And through that, and a little bit more of an explanation, which is what we actually need to go through today, that we can know that every single copy of the Quran is authentic upon the source that it came from. So it must be original. It cannot be any kind of a tampered copy. Okay, so this was only an example, by the way. This is not the proof in and of itself. This is not a reason or an excuse to Bible bash or anything like that. This was only an example just to demonstrate those qualities of an authentic message being put into, being applied to different documents. And we just chose, the most famous one, which is the Bible. And we showed that, on any of the three characteristics, it doesn't have it. But the Quran does, which is what gives us reason to have a look at the Quran first, because the Quran, because some people might say, well, why don't you have a look at the Vedas or any other, religious document or document that claims to be a message from God? Because ultimately nothing else even claims to have these characteristics. If nothing else even claims to have the characteristic, and only one does, and only the Quran does claim to have these characteristics, then it makes sense to look at that first, right? Because at the end of the day, if the Quran is claiming it, let's examine the claim. If the claim is false, we can debunk the Quran and throw the Quran away. But if the claim is true, then by definition, everything else must be false, because everything else contradicts with the Quran. Well, everything else contradicts with everything else. There can only be the one true message, right? You can't have two independent things that from the same source that are going to be contradictory, which makes sense. That's why we're going to look at the Quran first and foremost. Wait, hold on one second. Right, let's have a look. What if someone said, yes, the Bible has been changed, but it doesn't affect the core creed, like the change? Like, well, yeah, what's the basis on changing that? The Bible has been changed, but it doesn't affect the core creed. How on what basis can you say that? Because I would argue, and I'm sure a lot of people would argue around the world, that the core creed of Christianity has changed. That it used to be about worshiping God, and now it's about worshiping Jesus, who they'll say is God, but nowhere does it claim that. Nowhere does Jesus say that I'm God, worship me. Do you see things like that? That they can say that it hasn't changed, but they can't prove it. That's the whole point. You can't demonstrate that. This is just wishful ideals. Okay? And we're not talking about the core creeds and things like that, because look, at the end of the day, all theologies around the world essentially share, for the most part, the same characteristics. And why wouldn't they? Because they all come from the same source ultimately at some point, right? And they all teach things, of being kind to your neighbor, love thy fellow neighbor, whatever have you. No religion teaches actively, go out and kill the other person because the other person just believes something completely different to you. Everything is all about, compassion, understanding, and basically, trying to push society towards a better place. But then there are some cracks that appear in every single one that, society and people, start to widen and indulge in. So, for example, alcohol. Alcohol is from the Islamic perspective the mother of all sins. But if you have a theology that is fairly lax on that, then it allows society to engage in it, and it forms a destructive process, and things like that. So it's not good enough just to have something that's close enough to the ideal. We need to know what the exact original message is, particularly when you have multiple messages that are competing again for your intention. At the end of the day, there are multiple different artifacts around the world that are all claiming to be revelation. And we need to know for our own salvation, because there are fundamental differences between them, which one is authentic. So being kind of close enough is not good enough. We need to know, especially because we have the ability to discern the reality, we need to know which one is the actual truth. Okay? So let's just go over some examples of ayat or verses. I don't like the term verses because they're not verses, they're ayat. They are miraculous statements. The verse kind of implies a biblical thing, but so let's go over some examples of ayat in the Quran where some of these characteristics are exposed. So with regards to, and you don't need to memorize these, of course you guys are going to have the notes. The notes are going to be available obviously when this goes up on YouTube, the link there. So we have, there are different ayat here which claim the authority of the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where the author of the Quran, the voice of the Quran is. Okay, it seems like everything cut out then on my side for a second. Do I need to reverse back a second? I'm sorry, I don't know what happened there. It seemed like a network connection just dropped out then for a second. I don't know why. Okay, let me start this slide again. Right, okay. So we have here, for example, different ayat from the Quran, from the author of the Quran, from the voice of the Quran, claiming authority over the Quran as a whole. So you can see here that this is a revelation from the entirely merciful, the especially merciful, names of Allah. And again, this talking about the Quran itself, the whole thing as a revelation. It's not possible for this Quran to be produced from other than Allah. Again, arguing and claiming authority of the Quran, that the Quran is from the divine reality, Allah, which again we had the segue from the last session, Qul huwallahu ahad from Surah Ikhlas, say He is Allah the One, so we know who the name of our divine reality. We have certainly sent down to you a book in which is your mention. We, this is the royal we from Allah. Yeah, okay, yeah, it did drop out there. Okay. Many different ayat of the Quran. So again, this is not like a passing point. This is not something that's just mentioned in the background. There are multiple mentions throughout the Quran where the Quran is attributed directly, solely, exclusively as originating from our Creator, from the divine reality, from Allah. Okay, so we have several different examples of this that nobody could really claim other than the Quran itself being claiming. Nobody could ever suggest other than the Quran being or claiming authority from Allah. At no point, the skeptics will say, well, okay, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, composed the Bible himself, but at no point is that ever claimed. There is no document, there is no hadith, there is no statement, there is nothing in the Quran or in the Sunnah or anywhere else where it's attributed that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam claimed at any point any authority or any origin of the Quran itself. The Quran, every single artifact that exists, only exclusively points to our Creator. And again, we also have ayat here of the authority and the protection combined, right? That will they not reflect on the Quran? If it had been from any other, then they would have found with it much contradiction, and it's indeed we who sent down the Quran, and indeed we'll be its guardian. So again, there is a very clear notion being painted here that the Quran itself is being protected now by the divine, that there is something different about this that is unique to the Quran that wasn't there for anything else. Okay, now one of the things that the Quran has that none of the other artifacts have is a falsification test. So in order to assert these characteristics that it is from the divine, the Quran contains a falsification test, which is basically a test that you can administer upon the Quran to determine whether it's actually of divine origin or whether it's not. Okay, because then if you determine that it's not of divine origin, then you can just discard it. Whereas if you determine that it is of divine origin, then you need to be paying it a little bit more attention. So there are multiple different tests. This is not in order of how they appear or how they were revealed. This is just in order of, well, you'll see the order. It's just at this point how easy they would be to claim. So the one test is basically to produce something like the Quran. So the Quran is basically claiming that if mankind and jinn, all of creation, got together to produce something like the Quran, they wouldn't produce anything like it. And here it's talking about the Quran as a whole, okay, with its holistic attributes. So if people were able to get together and produce something like the Quran as a whole, this verse would have been proven false, and by being proven false, it would have necessarily demonstrated that it cannot be from our Creator, because there are mistakes and contradictions or whatever have you in it. There's another one which is just not even the whole Quran now, just to produce 10 surahs, 10 chapters like it. There is a simpler one again, which is just to produce a single surah, a single chapter. Now bear in mind that there are 3 surahs, there are 3 chapters in the Quran that are only 3 lines long each, 3 short statements each. So this is, and it's done 3 times, so it's not like a one-off thing. It's done 3 different times, talking about 3 different subjects, right? So it's not like it's not possible to do in the language or something like that. It's just nobody's able to do it except the divine. Again, these are relatively, if you look at it, they're supposedly simple challenges, right? Anyway, there's also the one, just to produce a statement like it, speech like it. Okay, the most famous one is the one in Surah Al-Baqarah. It's right at the beginning. It's ayahs 23 and 24. which is basically, it's a very clear now falsification test, rather than just basically hinting that, oh, okay, it's from God and you won't be able to do it, whatever have you. This now is the actual challenge to mankind, okay? That if you are in doubt, now this is the you of mankind, of any disbeliever, right? If you are in doubt, because obviously the Muslims are not going to be in doubt, so whoever's reading this, if you are in doubt as to what we, the royal we, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has sent down upon our servant, which is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the messenger of God, then you produce a surah, a chapter like it, and then call all your witnesses except for God, if you are truthful, which is basically mean you can get anyone you like to be a witness for you, to examine it for you, to test it for you, and just say, yeah, does this match or not? Obviously the witness needs to be, you know, able to tell, but basically the option is open. You go ahead, do the work, and call anyone you want and see, you know, does what you have produced resemble what the Quran has? Okay, and again, you know, your witnesses needs to be some kind of an expert. You know, we're talking about an expert witnesses. We're not talking about your best friend next door who's just going to agree with you willy-nilly. We're talking about a witness who is qualified to be a witness in this regard. Okay, but then the next ayah goes to continue. But if you cannot do it, and here's the prediction, you will never do it. Therein is the prediction, okay? Then have fear of the fire whose fuel is men and stone, prepared for the disbeliever. So basically, if you can't do it, and you're never going to do it, therein is the prediction, because then you need to realize, you need to wake up that if you're not able to do this now, that, you know, if you're not able to follow, then you have to realize that this could not have been created by man in the first place, and that's where you need to be seriously paying attention to whether you want to accept it or not. Because if you choose to reject it at that point, after having, you know, proven to yourself that this couldn't have been composed by man, then you need to be, you know, seriously considering where your eternal abode might be. Okay, so let's examine this for a second, and let's just say, right, what does something like it mean? You know, because the Quran is saying just, you know, bring something like it. What does that actually mean? What's the characteristic here? What's the criteria? You know, so the Quran itself, you know, there are many different characteristics and qualities that whatever man chooses to produce has to basically conform to this, which is, and this is only a subset, by the way. This is just like the obvious ones, which is that it's composed in pure Arabic. Okay, so you can't have it in a different language, it has to be in the Arabic. You have to have concise, flexible statements without excessive verbosity, which basically means something short, something pithy, something that basically gets the heavy point across, but without needing an excess amount of words. That if you start, you know, if there's a way that you've phrased a sentence and you could have said the same thing in a much more powerful way or with less words, whatever have you, that's the way that you should be doing it. Concentrated use of rhetorical devices with analogies and grammar and things like that, best word choice and placement. By the way, you know, again, I'm not going to explain all of these, because this is like, you know, not even a lecture in and of itself. This is a whole series of lectures. In fact, if you want to know more about this, personally, I would recommend Numan Ali Khan's stuff for English speaking audience. Bayina, it's just fascinating, you know, the depth that he manages to show. You know, may Allah bless him, and all of the you know, because he's standing on the shoulders of giants as well. So, you know, all of our scholars in this regard, and all of the Muslims as well worldwide. It's Ramadan. Why should we be restricted with our du'as? You know, so you've got various different characteristics there, right? But rather than making this into a checkbox exercise, I mean, let's just use our human faculties. We know that something like something else is when someone who is best placed to judge, someone who knows what they're talking about, can basically affirm that one thing resembles another thing. That's when we know that that it is like it. Okay, so we'll leave the criteria to the experts in Arabic. And of course, experts in Arabic exist. They're not all Muslims, by the way, you know, because you know, you have different people of different religious backgrounds being experts in Arabic. Right, so this is not like a Muslim-only test, like where only the Muslims can validate it. We have experts, you know, of Arabic, you know, Orientalists and whatever have you, who can judge. And as yet, you know, no one has basically said that, yeah, there is a match. Okay, so I mean, just to go into this a little bit. All right, yeah, okay. So yeah, if you produce something that's stylistically like the original item, not different or inferior, then it should be difficult, if not impossible, to differentiate the origin origin of the fake from the genuine. If you can't tell the difference between two things, then they're considered the same. Okay, now it's important here as well, because some people will throw out a contention to you, and you need to be aware of this contention, that of course it's impossible for someone to bring something like the Quran, because we as Muslims, we've memorized the Quran, we know what the Quran is. So if someone brings another surah and says this is part of the Quran, then we're automatically going to reject it because we know it's not. The challenge isn't that. The challenge isn't to fool us and to say that, oh, something is part of the Quran and it got left out, right? Because that's not going to happen, okay? That's not the challenge. The challenge is to bring something that an expert in Arabic would argue and could make a case to say that this has the same characteristics, the same standards and whatever have you, and if not for our prior knowledge, whatever have you, Muslims around the world may and could have accepted this as being Quran. Does that make sense? So it's to bring something of the same kind of nature and quality, not to show to us that, okay, this actually was and is Quran, okay? Because that latter part's not going to happen. But that first part, do you think that's a fair challenge, by the way? This is what we have to consider. Is this a fair falsification test for someone to just bring about some speech that is similar in quality and characteristic to what they attribute is something else, that came from a man? Okay, the Quran is not asking them, as a falsification test, to do something completely external to itself. It's not asking for them to start flying around or make a river red or bring fire down from the sky or whatever have you. The Quran is not asking any of these things that might be beyond the ability of man. The Quran is literally just saying that, look, this is just speech in and of itself. It's just words. It's letters in Arabic, right? That if you're attributing this to a man or even a bunch of men, then by the same token, you should be able to reproduce the exact same thing, right? So prove it, basically, put your money where your mouth is, kind of thing. So I would argue, and you guys have gone very, very quiet now, that it absolutely, and there's only talking. So is it a fair challenge? Right, what if someone said being inimitable doesn't mean it's from God? Egyptian is inimitable, but it doesn't mean it's a product by God. Okay, it's not inimitable just because we haven't been able to do it, but here's the difference. The pyramids are not some message. They don't point to anything. They just happen to exist, and there's no challenge there for the pyramid. Fine, so we can't reproduce that today. So what? There's no challenge there. Just because, yeah, that's fine. Because even from, if you accept the Islamic perspective, we believe in the jinn or whatever have you, and certain things, jinn could have produced something. Again, that's going to be beyond human ability. But even from our perspective now, what difference does it make? There's no challenge there. There's no challenge there. There's no claim there to be from the divine. So fine, I will agree that just because something is inimitable doesn't mean it's from God. It just means it's outside the capacity for mankind. But here's the crux. The Quran here, the skeptics of the Quran attribute it to man. And if it's attributed to man, then it must be imitable. And if it's not imitable, if it's inimitable, then it cannot be attributed to man. That's the point. If it cannot be attributed to man, and the Quran itself then attributes itself to God, that's where you have to recognize the truth of the matter. Does that make sense? Unless they're basically saying, well, okay, no, it's actually from some other kind of entity that is, produced it, that's still beyond human ability, but not necessarily God. Well, it's calling to God. So if where are you going to believe in this third-party entity from? Remember Occam's razor. How are you going to believe in the jinn unless you've got some authoritative, authentic basis to believe in the jinn in the first place? Shakespeare's not inimitable. Shakespeare is not inimitable at all. In fact, there's discussion with regards to Shakespeare's works, whether his later works were actually written by a shadow writer whose name was something I cannot remember right now. But in fact, I want to say Thomas Aquinas, but I think Thomas Aquinas is something else now, right? But there is debate within the English literary group as to whether his latter works, or the latter works that are attributed to him, whether they actually were written by him, and even then written by him, were they completely written by him. So they're not inimitable at all. They can actually be copied. And it's not even the fact of being inimitable. Here's the other point as well, which I'm not sure if it's on the slide, so let me explain this point too. The very first person to come up with something, right? It's very, very hard to come up with something. It's very easy to follow, right? The first person to come up with something is regarded as the genius. So let's just take, for example, what we discussed last time, one of the previous sessions, the theory of relativity, okay? Einstein is a genius, coming up with that, working it, deriving it out, and whatever have you, world-class genius, okay? Nobody's going to be able to take that away from him. But that is taught in school now. Everybody understands. When I say everybody, it's very, very simple for people to grasp and to extrapolate further. We've built further theories on it. We've now taken it further than Einstein has. But the point there being, that doesn't diminish the level of intelligence that Einstein had. Now we can actually follow in his works and we can improve it wherever have you, because we've got the template there. There is no skill that human beings have in terms of an artistic output, in terms of an output where we've done something. So, whatever, science, what's it called? Architecture, designing buildings, writing, composition, music, whatever have you. You'll have experts that come up with something new, something novel. But once people have learned the pattern, we can extrapolate. We can reproduce other things according to that same pattern. Okay, that's the human's ability, that we can copy and we can reproduce and we can extrapolate. It's coming up with the original, which is hard. Now the Quran arguably would be the original. It should be, it follows in human nature that we now have the blueprint. We have the Quran as a whole. We can just extrapolate and just produce more in the same nature. That's what the Quran is actually saying. Go ahead and do it. Do it. And once you've done it, if you can do it, then obviously you've demonstrated that, yeah, this is the capacity of man. But the point here being, the Quran is saying you're never going to do it. And by virtue of you never being able to do it, that itself proves that the origin of the Quran couldn't have been from man. Does that make sense? We're going to get there. Okay, but yeah, the Quran is not, Shakespeare's work is not inimitable. It's completely imitable. Back to the challenge question, is it a fair challenge? Absolutely, because the Quran is not calling for anything more than speech, which is within the ability of anyone from mankind to produce. This is an absolutely fair challenge that anyone could take up. Okay, so let's explore this challenge a little bit more. Chinese whispers, okay, or I believe it's called telephone in America, is a game where one person says something. It's a very short, simple statement to one person. So one person says it to another, and that message then gets passed on from person to person to person to person to person. And in pretty much, I would say 99 out of 100 cases, it changes. What if someone said it's not fair because God is challenging weak human beings? That would be a really, really, really weird contention, because the whole point of the challenge is that the challenge is for people who are skeptical that the Quran is from God in the first place. So the people who are skeptical of the miracle of the Quran are people who believe that the Quran is necessarily from man because jinn don't exist and whatever have you, and animals don't write books. So people who are skeptics believe through necessity that man originated the Quran. And the point here being that if you think man originated the Quran, you're a man, human, and you should be able to extrapolate that further. So go ahead and prove it. Literally put your money where your mouth is. That's the point of it making a fair challenge. If the Quran was asking, okay, to falsify the Quran, you have to, snap your fingers and produce a skyscraper out of thin air. That's the falsification test. Could have said that. But that would be a very unfair test, because that has absolutely no bearing on the nature of the Quran itself, the nature of the miracle, and it's something that we know is, that nobody would agree is inside the productive capacity of man. Make sense? Anyway, so we have an example here of Chinese whispers, of a message being distorted, which is that they're going to advance. So this is, a commander on a battlefield. So they're going to advance. Can you send reinforcements? And the message heard at the end, which is that we're going to a dance. Can you lend 3 and 4 pence? Right? Obviously, similar but completely different. Okay. So Chinese Whispers, I'm sure this is a game that we've played in our youth or whatever have you. And it's the basis of rumors and whatever have you going around. But we know from our own personal experience that it's very, very, very difficult to preserve a message. Now, let's have a look at the qualities of Chinese Whispers, okay? That Chinese Whispers has 6 very, very important qualities that we need to pay attention of, okay? The goal of Chinese Whispers here is to preserve the message, okay? The message itself is short. The message is in our native language. It's very simple, uncomplicated, and easy to remember. The number of people involved in the game is very, very low, single figures usually, and the game is over in, very quickly, literally within a minute or so, okay? So we're talking about all of these 6 completely different independent factors that are all conducive towards preserving a message, right? All of these things should help that message be preserved. But what we discover is, through our own practice, through our own play, through, just from our own experiences, that it pretty much never happens. The message pretty much keeps getting distorted for whatever reason, okay? Because, let's just say message gets distorted in transmission. Some person might say something wrong. Once a person has said something wrong, that incorrect mistake continues on down the chain. There's no way for someone to revert it back to what the original was because they only received the distorted message. Someone may hear it wrong. So someone else might have passed on the correct message, but someone else may have misheard it, right? So again, that's going to be a mistake passed down the chain. Or someone may just misremember it. They may have heard it correct, it was said correctly, it was heard correctly, but they may now misremember it. It's like, oh, what was the word? And they may just substitute their own word or substitute their own meaning. And again, once this substitute happens, that's just going to continue on all the way down the line, and you're never going to get the original message back. You're basically just going to have, as soon as the corruption comes in, the corruptions are just going to grow and grow and grow and grow, and you're just going to get further and further and further away from what the message originally was. There is no way, once any kind of a defect has been introduced, there is no way to bring it back, okay? So that's the nature of Chinese Whispers. Now, let's have a look at how Islam actually spread, okay? So we have here a map of the Middle East, that area. So we can see here that within the first 100 years or so of Islam, the Muslims basically spread out from Arabia. It wasn't called Saudi Arabia at the time, okay, because that only came now in the last century. It was just called Arabia. That the Muslims basically spread out, and they went north, south, east, west, into India, into Africa, into Europe. This is where into Spain and Gibraltar, or Jabal Tahir, the mountain of Tahir. They went literally everywhere. They were spreading out, and of course they were taking the Quran with them. They were spreading the Quran. So how is this Quran being spread? How is the Quran being spread? You've got to think about, they weren't carrying books. There were no bookshops there at the time. There were no printing presses. This is literally, the Quran was being memorized. It was being spread orally, exactly the same way as Chinese Whispers. One person is saying it and repeating it to another person, okay? Now, just have a look at the nature of society at the time, right? Okay, look at the literary rate of society. So let's take the whole of society at the time. Of the whole of society, very, very, very few, or only a subset of that society can read Arabic, because you have to account, there are people going to be in that society that can't read, okay, or can't read Arabic, both. So you have the wider society, but only a smaller subset of them can actually read Arabic. And of those that can read Arabic, you have then a smaller subset that can actually write it, because it's possible to know how to read a language without being able to know how to write it, okay? But it's not possible to know how to write a language and not how to read, okay? So reading is, the people who can read the language is always going to be greater than those who can actually write it. Writing is more of a skill, okay? So again, you're going to have a smaller section of society in this regard. And then of those that can actually write, you're going to have, again, a smaller subset, again, that actually have the tools to write with. Because don't forget, at the time, this is at the time of revelation, that there was no stationary shops or whatever have you. There was no paper mills and whatever have you. That literally they were just writing on bark, on dried skin, on stone, on literally on anything that they could get their hands on. It was very, very obviously some people had something like parchment and things like that, but it wasn't widespread. It was to have a compiled book was a rare thing in and of itself. That the primary form of transmission of the Qur'an, and this is what needs to be understood, the primary form of transmission of the Qur'an was oral. It's because, as we've got there, illiteracy was very, very common. Very few people could read. So again, the books are not going to benefit you if you can't read. And even though there were physical copies of the Quran, again, they were all handwritten as well. And even in writing things by hand, there's the possibility for mistakes to enter. No Muslim is going to say that in a handwritten Quran there is no mistake. Yeah, there can be, but that's introduced by a human being. And we have stories in the recent years of people have dug up these old historical Qur'ans, and there are variations in it, and there's mistakes in it, and whatever have you. From our perspective, from an Islamic perspective, yeah, that's fine, no problem. We've got no problem with that, because they were very likely known to have been mistakes, faulty copies from a faulty scribe or whatever have you. And the way that we, dispose of a Quran is by burying it, or by dissolving it in water, or by burning it. This Quran burning days that's one of the ways we dispose of Quran. That's out of respect for the words. We don't chuck it in the bin. So these kinds of things don't mean anything to us. It's not a problem. It's so in terms the point that I want to get to here is that in terms of the transmission of the Quran, there was every single opportunity, there was every single reason to expect the message to have been corrupted. Right? Because again, Chinese whispers, people can't pass on messages accurately, and even human mistakes will come through. So just imagine now that you've got, as we went on the map, we've got the Quran being spread in different directions. You've got one going one way. Now let's just imagine the beginning of Surah Al-Fatiha, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Okay, imagine someone somewhere just changed it Lillahi alhamd, right? So instead of Alhamdulillah, all praise belongs to Allah, they say Lillahi alhamd, to Allah belongs the praise. For the most part, the same thing, right? There's grammatically, that's a separate lecture I actually have, that we can see the difference between the two. But for the most part, for the layperson, it's the same thing. To Allah belongs the praise, all praise belongs to God. It's the same thing. That would be a variance. And if you imagine one version going one way, one version going the other way, then you have different different changes. Is it Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, or is it Ar-Rahim Ar-Rahman? Which order do these words come in, and even which are the names that are being used, and whatever have you. There are so many ways that you could have differences being spread, that those differences would never catch up. Because if you have someone going east and someone going to the west, and they've already set about different versions, you're going to have variations and conflicts by the end of it. Just think about it. It was transmitted in opposite directions across different civilizations. Now, this is the other thing as well. It's being transmitted across different civilizations who don't speak Fusha Arabic, the classical Arabic, the Bedouin Arabic, as their primary language. I mean, a lot of the languages are based around Arabic, but don't forget, we're going. The Muslims are going into the lands of the Persians now. The lands of the Byzantine Christians, who have their own languages, which may be close to Arabic, the same way as for example, Urdu and Hindi. They share some words and similarities, because the further you go away, they have their own differences. But you're talking about people who don't understand the specific nuances, and again, every single opportunity for the Quran to be corrupted. The point here being that when you think about this expanse and how the Quran was actually being transmitted, at some point you've got to think, well, okay, fine, how many different versions, how many different variations would I expect to see? And in reality, you would expect to see that there would be, in a similar situation to what the Christians find themselves now with the number of Bibles, that you would expect to see literally hundreds of thousands of different variations, to the point where it would be almost now impossible to ascertain, well, what was the original? Does that make sense? Because don't forget now, 100 years down the line, all the companions have passed away. You've only got secondary, tertiary information now. And, even there may be discrepancies depending on which version that person learned from. So you've got to realize that if the things played out as per the norm, what we expect from our own experiences, that we would expect to see literally hundreds of thousands, if not more, variations of the Quran. Yet we find ourselves in a situation where there is only one version. There literally is only one version of the Quran, and that in and of itself is what is the miracle actually that the Quran was pointing towards, that you'll never be able to do it. The fact that we can recognize, especially now, that there is only one version. How is that even possible, that the Quran is the only thing that resisted every single opportunity, for want of a better word, every single characteristic, every single factor that should have contributed to its demise, yet the Quran resisted and overcame every single one, exactly as the Quran said it would, exactly as it said it would, because we showed the ayah from before that the Quran itself says that it's from God and God's going to protect it. And the Quran demonstrated this by overcoming every single, opportunity for it to have faltered and crumbled. So it's not impossible. It's not possible for this to have just been produced by man. So I've got here a statement. How is it possible for an intrusive message claiming to be from God? Let me just go on this intrusive message for a bit. What is an intrusive message? The Quran is not just a message from God. It's an intrusive message. It intrudes on our lives. It imposes itself on our lives. So you have a look at the nature of the Arabs before Islam and after Islam, right? That you have a look at their nature. They used to perform tawaf naked. They used to eat carrion. They used to commit all kinds of crimes. They used to have unlimited, the men used to marry an unlimited number of women, and didn't give them any of their rights. In fact, actually, when the fathers would pass away, the sons would inherited the wives and their mothers and whatever have you. There were so many different things going on that when Islam came, they would consume alcohol, like nobody's business. Because water was dirty, so alcohol was cleaner and healthier from one perspective. So the society itself, alcohol was abundant in society. And you have a look after Islam. I mean, it's not a good question really to ask what changed, because literally everything changed. Like, you've got to ask yourself, well, what stayed the same? Everything changed. Like, this is the nature of the Quran. When the person accepts the Quran, literally everything in their life changes. And that's what we mean by an intrusive text, that this is not just some kind of a book that can just sit on the shelf wherever have you, like Harry Potter or wherever have you, right? This is an intrusive text which is actually going to change and motivate societies. It can topple dynasties, and it brought down kingdoms and things like that. A lot of rulers were scared of the Muslims because, again, that would be an end to their family dynasty and whatever have you. It brings an end to monarchies and whatever have you. So the point here is it's not possible, or not. I say it's not possible. It's not humanly possible. You've got to ask yourself, how is it possible for an intrusive message that claimed to be from God, and it openly challenged mankind, say, try and corrupt it, try and change it. You've got all of the tools available to you. Try and change it. And it resisted every single attempt and remained intact for centuries, millennia. It's been 1400 years, and there's been no variations of it. There's been no corruptions of it. This is an unprecedented act throughout history. No one in the history of mankind, nothing in the history of mankind has ever achieved this, which demonstrates that the origin of the Quran necessarily has to be outside of the productive capacity of mankind. That it was not possible for mankind, for any one of mankind, to have produced this book with all of the claims. And we're not even talking about, historical accuracies and prophecies and whatever have you, everything else that we talk about in the Quran. We're not even talking about that. Just with the general bold, grandiose claims and the language and whatever have you, to people who were experts in that level of language, and challenged them to change it. And it got spread through hundreds of thousands of different people who didn't even understand it, don't even understand the language in its primary nature, and yet it still remains identical to what it was before, and it hasn't been changed. It's literally, it's outside the predictive capacity of mankind. There is absolutely no explanation for it. Okay, which brings us to our deductive argument. You remember from epistemology, this is basically what the argument is, right? Why? So premise number one: the Quran is from man, or it's from Allah. So here's a question, right? Why have we included Allah as the potential source of the origin of the Quran here in this premise? Why is this there? This is an important point. So these 3 points are important to understand. Okay, why is Allah considered as a potential source? What do you guys reckon? There must be a light spot. Okay, why is... Okay. You guys are a bit slow at typing. Okay. The Quran or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is added in here. Yeah, exactly. Jazakallah khair. We've added in Allah as a source, as a potential source, because literally the Quran claims it. Okay, it's not that we just decided wishful thinking. The Quran itself claims to be from Allah. Hence, we just take it as word. So it's either from man, or as the Quran itself says, it's from Allah. Okay. Now, does that become a circular argument? And this is the important thing. Does that become a circular argument? Well, how are you using Allah to prove the Quran and this, that, and the other? And for the sake of time, I'll answer it. It's not a circular argument that the two are proving each other, that, well, you can't prove one without proving the other, and you can't prove the other without proving the one in the beginning, because we've independently demonstrated the necessity of the existence of a divine reality. We've independently demonstrated that there has to be something that brought us into reality in the first place. Okay, so we have an independent argument that is completely separate and distinct from the Quran, that there must be necessarily some intelligent creator that brought us into being. That's why, as far as the Quran basically saying, well, that is Allah, we've got an independent reason to go with that. We don't need the Quran to prove Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. We've got a separate proof for that in and of itself. Does that make sense? So, and now, here's the question: why don't we include the other potential authors of the Quran? For example, animals, angels, jinn, fairies, hobgoblins, leprechauns, and things like that. Particularly the fantastical ones. Why don't we include them as potential authors? So this might also answer one of the questions that was asked earlier with regard to the pyramids. What excludes those from being considered? Question on preservation. We'll come back to that question. I want to answer to this one first. Preservation of Quran is not enough unless the meaning of the text and the correct interpretation are preserved as well. Exactly, we can't demonstrate that. Well, it's not a case that we can't demonstrate their existence. Occam's razor. Remember Occam's razor from epistemology? We have no basis in which to believe that animals, angels, jinn, animals we know exist. Angels, jinn, fairies, hobgoblins, leprechauns, whatever have you, pixies at the bottom of your garden. We have no reason or basis to believe that they exist, let alone that they're compiling, theological documentation for us. Okay, there's absolutely no basis to believe in that. There's nothing that points towards it, so it would be a ridiculous point to even consider that as a premise in the first place. Okay, obviously, we know mankind is capable of speech, so we include man as a potential origin, or Allah, because the Quran itself claims to be from Allah, and we have an independent reason and argument to believe that the divine reality exists. So that's why first premise is the Quran is from man or from Allah. The second premise is that the Quran is not the work of man, because again, for the attributes, for the reasons that we've discussed, that the Quran has been preserved, that it has been untampered with, despite the fact that there was every single opportunity and factor available for the message of the Quran to have failed and to have been corrupted, that the Quran has resisted every single such challenge, which is exactly what the Quran prophesies that it was going to do. So we know, because this does not conform to anything that mankind can produce that is outside the productive capacity of man, because even just now, if anyone produces anything similar towards it, well, nobody has affirmed in the history of time that anyone's produced anything similar towards what the Quran has produced, that we know the Quran could not have been the product of man, because there is no characteristic or basis in which to say so. The only basis on which people will continue to argue that the Quran must be from man is, again, the same way as the scientific evidence of, oh, evolution is a fact, because if they're only looking at a naturalistic explanation, the only naturalistic explanation obviously is that man produced the Quran. But that's, again, that's question begging. That presumes in the first place atheism to be true, that there is no God. If you take into account the necessity that a divine reality exists, and the divine reality could very well be the origin of the Quran, then you're forced to conclude that the divine reality is the origin of the Quran, which is what the conclusion of our argument is, that the Quran must be from Allah. Okay, so let's let me just go to the question. Question on the preservation of the Quran. The preservation of the Quran is not enough unless the meaning, text, and the correct interpretation are preserved as well. I understand where this person is coming from, that obviously, you know, as Muslims, we need the Quran and we need the Sunnah as well, right? We need the Sunnah as well, because obviously the Quran mentions, you know, to follow the example of Rasulullah, to follow the example of the Messenger, etc., etc., etc. The Quran tells us, you know, that we need to offer our salah, we need to offer our prayers, but it doesn't describe the nature of the prayers. So we need what is known in Islam as the Sunnah, as the practice of the Prophet and the Messenger, but that is not part of the miracle itself. You can possibly argue that, look, that even the preservation of the Sunnah is something miraculous because it's necessary for us. But the problem is, that's a different argument, and it's not one that you know, when we have the preservation of the Quran itself, because it's the Quran which is the miracle. The Sunnah is not necessarily the miracle in that sense. That you're right on one side from Islamic theological position, that yeah, you need the two, because the Sunnah also, you know, helps explain the Quran, etc. You need to understand the revelation in context of, you know, when and where was it being revealed. For example, the famous ayat that Islamophobes like to bring up about, you know, the killing of particular people and whatever have you, had a very, very particular context, and you need to get that from the Sunnah. So yes, you know, in terms of the religion to propagate, you need the two. But the miracle of the Quran is the preservation of the Quran, the message itself. The Sunnah can have variances in it, and we do have variances. We do have differences of understanding, whatever have you, and that's part of the beauty of Islam, actually, that those variances allow us flexibility. And you could argue, and I would argue, that this is part of the design, where the Sunnah is the flexible aspect of the Quran, because obviously society, you know, the rules of the Sharia need to flex and whatever have you to you know, to work in different situations or whatever have you, rather than, you know, one rule fits all for every single nation, every single generation, every single time, every single situation. That the Sunnah allows for the flexibility of the Sharia, but you still have the authenticity of the message to know that no, this came from the divine. So yes, I agree in one aspect, but that's not part of the miracle that we're arguing for right now. It is part of the miracle of Islam, but I wouldn't build an argument or the strongest argument based on that. You can have that as an iman boosting argument, so to speak. Okay, isn't this shifting the burden proof fallacy, asking someone to disprove your claim, i.e. it's inimitable? No, it's not. Because if someone is claiming that the Quran is from man, again, remember, you can't prove a negative, right? It's impossible to prove a negative. We already explained that. So if someone wants to say, well, the Quran is from a man, you can't prove that it's not from a man. And again, you can't prove that it's from Allah just because it says it's from Allah, because they could say, well, a man could have just wrote that. So the proof is actually upon the one who's making the extraordinary claim, that you've demonstrated that, look, the Quran. So we've proven, and we can prove and demonstrate that, look, the Quran has characteristics about it. Its history, its nature is such that it could not have been produced by a man. It literally just does not have those qualities and characteristics, and therefore it must be, you know, from deductive reasoning, it must be from Allah. The burden of proof, then, if someone is saying it's from a man, is from them to prove or to argue against your point, to say that actually no, all of these qualities and characteristics it's possible for man to do. If someone wants to say that no, it's possible for man to produce an intrusive message that lasts for generations, that completely changes societies and whatever have you, along with the message, to try and corrupt it, whatever have you, it's completely possible for man to do that. We would say, go ahead, bring it, because it doesn't exist. It literally doesn't exist. Go ahead, try. People have tried to come near the Quran. People tried at the time. They were laughed out of stock. You have Musaylimah the liar talking about al-fil, the elephant. What is the elephant? It has a long trunk and a small tail. The frog. What is the frog? It lives half on land and half in the water. Like, what nonsense is this? Like, there is nothing. One of the characteristics of the Quran is that it talks about lofty things that are to do with your nature, your existential nature, and society and elevation, and the loftiness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the weight of the reward that encompasses upon you. What are you going to get from talking about a frog that half on water, half on land? Like, what difference does that make to anyone? Nothing. Right? So no, it's not shifting the proof. Okay. Now, that said, there is a very, very, very important contention that is raised here, okay, that we need to understand in context, because it's very easy to get wound up and get the wrong side of this, okay? What about erroneous versions? Okay? So there is, I don't want to say it's a story because it's historical fact, that at the time of Uthman, may Allah be pleased with him, who was the third Caliph of Islam, there was an incident that took place where the Quran was burnt, okay, where he ordered the destruction of Qur'ans from many, many, many people, okay? So what we have to understand here is we have to understand history, that at this point in time, after the passing of Rasulullah sallallahu, that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, may Allah be pleased with him, and Umar bin Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, spent time allowing the Muslims to go on conquest and spreading Islam through different lands and whatever have you. Okay, now there are variations in the recitation of the Quran, that the Quran was revealed in multiple dialects that was suited, because don't forget that the Arabs didn't have a homogeneous language, so to speak, that they had certain phrases and things like that, because don't forget they were indigenous tribal regions, that they were like pockets of civilizations and societies, that it was revealed in dialects that was suited to each one, where one might have a very slight variation on the other, where the meanings were complementary. So there was never an incident where the meanings were contradictory. So for example, talking about, or actually let's just say in Surah Al-Fatiha, for example, there's two different ways to read the third ayah, which is Maliki Yawmiddin and Malik Yawmiddin. Okay, so Malik and Malik. Two different words. One is the king and the owner, and one is the owner, but they complement each other. The being the king, the ruler of the Day of Judgment, implies being the ruler implies that there are people, subordinates that are taking care of the day-to-day activity. I say day-to-day activity on the Day of Judgment. It's just one day, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be in control of the angels who are going to be herding and shepherding the people and whatever have you, and doing all administrative things. But then there's also the owner of something, which is the one who is in direct control of it. So for example, I am the owner of this watch. I don't have a subordinate to deal with anything for me. I am in direct control of it. And again, the same way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in direct control of anything. So you have complementary meanings. You have slight variances, but complementary meanings. Anyway, so the point was, someone would go east and he would say Malik Yawmiddin, and someone would go west and he would say Malik Yawmiddin. Okay, and now don't forget, now before the Muslims, the Persian Empire and the Roman Byzantine Empire were warring, and they didn't want to conquer the Arabs, because the Arabs were just, they were backwards people, and the problem is when you conquer people, you've got to basically look after them, you've got to set up infrastructure for them, or whatever have you, and these guys, they didn't want to do that, because that's just way too much headache, right? So these guys were just warring for world dominance themselves, but just left the Arabs alone, and the Arabs basically came out, exploded, and conquered both lands. And now for the first time, people in each of these societies, because it's all now Muslim land, are now able to freely travel. So one person from one side now can now travel and say, oh, the Persians can now, or the ex-Persians can now say, oh, well, I want to see what the Byzantine societies are like, and vice versa, because it's all safe now, because everything is under Muslim rule. So he's learned his Quran one way, Maliki Yawmiddin, and the other one's learned Maliki Yawmiddin, and now he goes to the masjid and he says, oh, you're reading it wrong. You're reading it wrong, because he doesn't understand the variances, right? He again, the new Muslim, they don't understand the nuance of the Arabic. He doesn't understand the problem here, and it starts to cause problems. It starts to cause fitna, which is basically increasing at the time of Uthman. May Allah be pleased with him. So Uthman then basically took the decision at that point in time to eliminate all the variances, all the different renditions or whatever have you, and basically produce one single de facto rendition of the Quran as per the Qurayshi dialect. And this was again based on what Rasulullah had told him in advance. So he produced one version of the Quran, actually 4 different copies of this, and even there was a slight variance that still accounted for different things there, right? But anyway, one version was produced of 4 different copies, and he sent those 4 different copies out, and he said, right, anybody who wants to have a copy of the Quran has to copy from this mushaf that he has now sent out, and every other single one needs to be destroyed. Okay, and in that way, because again, don't forget, people had, they had their own mushafs or whatever have you, because the Quran wasn't revealed in order. Different ayat came at different points, different surah came at different points, and whatever have you. So it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle being filled in at different points. So people had even their own written copies, if anyone had it written down, was in a completely different order. You just had to know what the actual order of recitation actually was. And again, that comes from having that authentic Islamic knowledge. So his point was that no, anyone who wants now a copy of the Quran, because again, this is now several years, this is what, 15 plus years now after the passing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Quran is complete. There's no more revelation coming down. So this is the version, the composition of the Quran now, as we have produced. That is the actual, it's got the surahs in the correct order, it's got the ayat in the correct order, it's got the recitation according to the Qurayshi dialect, whatever have you. So anyone who now wants a copy of the Quran has to copy exactly this one and destroy every other single variance, right? Now, Orientalists would say that this event proves that there were differences and mistakes, whatever have you, in the Quran. No, it doesn't. It just proves that the way that people had recorded it differently as per the different ways that it was revealed, okay? So there was no difference in content, there was only a difference in composition and the recitation in and of it itself. But think about it, right? Think about it. Let's just say for argument's sake that the Orientalist position, the Orientalist argument was actually correct. Just play it out, right? That what they are basically arguing is that the Muslims at the time, the Sahaba, the companions, again, we're only 15 years after the passing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? That the companions who traveled with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that loved him, that understand that the Quran was revealed in their language. They understood it the closest, the best. It's not like some old ancient Shakespearean English, whatever. It's literally revealed in their day-to-day language. They understand what's going on. They understand the history. Their love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was such that they gave up their, everything that they owned and they had, to follow him, whatever have you. Are we saying that in 15 years that these people, of which there was over 120,000 Sahaba at the Rasulullah's farewell Hajj, right? Are we saying that all of these people, somehow now managed, inside of the space of 15 years, managed to corrupt the Quran? Fine, okay, if the Quran was a man-made document, I could believe that, absolutely. But then if you want to go with that, then how is it possible that Uthman came along thereafter and produced one book, and that one was now not corrupted? That is the one that got preserved for centuries, for 1400 years thereafter, despite now spreading out into further regions where people didn't even speak Arabic as a first language, despite going into areas where there were, regions that had active hostility against Islam. How is it that Uthman, may Allah be pleased with him, 15 years later after the passing of Rasulullah managed to produce something that had the miraculous qualities in it, that in and of itself was a subset of what existed before? Because he didn't come up with anything new in the Quran. The Quran was already out there. All he did was basically say, no, this is the same, this is the content in this order, this is the way it has to be preserved. Like, it makes no sense for anyone to say, well, no, the one that exists in the first 15 years, that's the work of man and it got corrupted, whatever have you, because by definition then Uthman's version of the Quran is the work of man. There's only one. There's only one of it. That was specifically the point, and that should have been destroyed straight away. That should have been corrupted inside of a year. People are copying it down, making mistakes, and all of again, there's too many variances. But then people will say, oh well, he had the authentic version that people had to copy from. Yeah, but where are those versions now? They're kind of all being lost. Again, even to date, there's nothing stopping people, and there was nothing stopping people then, destroying it. There were people who had a lot of motive to destroy the message of the Quran, because again, don't forget, it was an intrusive text. People lost their kingdoms and their dynasties and whatever have you over it. There was a lot of conflict because people didn't want this Islam to come and change their current lifestyles. The point there being that at the end of the day, history shows that whatever Uthman, may Allah be pleased with him, has produced has conformed to exactly the prophecies and the statements that the Quran mentioned therein, and still remains outside the productive capacity of mankind, which therefore necessitates believing that what Uthman produced was actually, or was actually, he didn't produce anything new, he just preserved what the Quran itself was in a particular format. In fact, his act was the greatest act of preservation that there was. It just basically made it easier to preserve the Quran rather than having all of these different variances that we would understand the reason why they exist, but an Orientalist or someone whose mindset is set to deliberately distort the message of truth would try and introduce variances in. Does that make sense? So far from the burning of the Quran being an evidence of the Quran being corrupted, it's actually an evidence that the Quran was preserved, because through necessity, whatever Uthman had produced, which itself was a subset of what existed already, necessarily has the characteristics that the Quran itself claimed to have. And the challenge is still open today for anyone to try and bring about any further variants of that. It still hasn't been met. And of course, once let's just say, let's just deal with a contention that someone can say, oh well, what if it has been met, and people have just been quiet about it. There's a phenomena going on social media these days, right, which I actually find fascinating, right, of ex-Muslims. That ex-Muslims love to identify themselves as ex-Muslims. Like, you don't see atheists going around saying, oh, I'm an ex-Christian or whatever have you. There's no ex anything else. Oh, I'm an ex-McDonald's customer or whatever have you. But literally, yes, I'm an ex-Muslim. Like they make a specific point to try and find anything, to publicize anything. Pay attention to me. I've got something against Islam. They go out of their way to try and claim some degree of an authority to say, oh no, I'm an expert on Islam, whatever have you. But it's still, even none of them have even gone so far as to gain any kind of credibility to say, well, actually no, I can challenge and disprove the miracle of the Quran, to the point where Arab linguists, I'm saying Arabic linguists, sorry, not Arab linguists, Arabic linguists. So you can be an Arabic linguist and be of any ethnicity, any religious background you want. But as yet, not a single one has basically said that, yeah, whatever you've come up with actually, is on the same standard as what the Quran is. They haven't got there. Nobody's got there. Because trust me, if one person could reach it and demonstrate the Quran was the work of man, multiple people could do it. And if multiple people could do it, many people would, and we would know about it. Okay? So, as yet, the preservation of the Quran is proof in and of itself that the Quran must be from divine origin. It cannot be from human origin. Okay? Right. One of the X-Men attempted the challenge. Yeah, I know there's been attempts. I know there's been attempts. I've actually heard some of the attempts. But my point being, to the point where an Arab linguist will actually agree, a third-party neutral Arab linguist who will examine the nature of the Quran, who looks at that, says, yeah, they're the same. That I could believe that it came from the same origin. Hasn't happened. Now, this for me is the greatest thing of all, because I know we've just demonstrated the nature of the Quran, but just think about this now. This is the last point. All right, okay, I didn't know that. Right, let's have a look at some of the miracles of Musa alayhi salam. This is the miracles that were given to his people, right? Musa alayhi salam had the miracles where the river was turned into blood. Okay, river was turned into blood. Can we produce something similar to that today? Absolutely. On St. Patrick's Day, in Chicago, which is, you know, St. Patrick's Day is an Irish festival or whatever have you, they actually dye the entire river green. Okay, there's photos of it, you can see it, but they, you know, they, for a specific celebration on a particular day, they can dye a river green. It's not the same as turning it to blood, but the point is, it's something similar. You turn the river red, we can turn it green. Okay, something similar. Fire coming down from the sky, and again, you know, it's unfortunate, but we've seen this many times in warfare. There's a particular nation, and will remain nameless, in the Middle East, that are firing, you know, white phosphorus and whatever have you upon, you know, Muslims in an open prison. But you know, the point is, have we seen fire coming down from the sky today? Is that miracle? Can we reproduce something like that today? Absolutely. Absolutely, we can rain fire. You know, mankind can rain fire down from the sky. Can we travel through the sea? You know, the same as Musa and his ummah did, travel through the sea. Absolutely. Here in the UK, we have the Channel Tunnel, which is a tunnel which connects the UK, the United Kingdom, England, and it goes through the sea or under the sea, and comes out in France. Two completely different disjointed lands, and you can travel through the sea. So again, if someone says, you know, can you do that? Can we reproduce that miracle? Absolutely, we can do that now. Let's have a look at the miracles of Isa alayhi salam. Okay, can we heal the blind? Yes, cataract surgery. It's a very, very simple procedure. It doesn't cost that much. There are many charities that are that are requesting funds to be able to do that. So yes, absolutely, we can do that. Curing leprosy. Well, leprosy is pretty much eradicated now, so we can, and we have actually done it. We've cured leprosy for the most part. Raising the dead, yes, within a certain time period, we can raise someone who is actually medically dead, so to speak. Well, I mean, the definition of death now changes, but someone whose heart has stopped, who's lying on the floor, and they've basically, you know, not to the point where their soul has left their body. We're just talking about from medical science, but someone whose heart has stopped, or whatever have you, we can shock them and bring them back to life, which is something similar to raising the dead. So the point here being that as big and as grandiose as these miracles were that were given to the people beforehand, if there was a challenge there to produce something similar to those, mankind can achieve that now. Yet the Qur'an is the only now occasion, and bear in mind, though all those miracles were separate to the message, the Qur'an is now the message and the miracle combined. Right? It's just speech. Everybody has the ability to speak. You know, anyone can just start learning Arabic and just start saying words. This should have been the easiest, the fastest one to debunk, the one thing that mankind should have been able to do straight away and say, yes, we can match this, we can do something similar to this, we can disprove this as being of divine origin, whatever have you. It's literally on the bottom rung of the ladder of complication to do. You know, even raining, you know, all of the other ones are a little bit more complicated and involved to do. But, you know, Arabic speech or just speech, it's literally on the bottom rung of the ladder. Like, how much easier could it get? And yet it's the one that stood the test of time. It's the one that as yet mankind as a whole has got nowhere near or close to be able to produce. So, whoops, what happened there? So that basically shows the magnitude and the magnificence of the Quran over and above all of the other miracles that came that were given to the Anbiya before, including the other miracles that were granted to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you know, it's something that, you know, we need to be a lot more conscious of, and I remind myself first before I remind any others. So that being said, that is the end of this session. Inshallah, that's pretty much all that we have. Inshallah, the next tomorrow at the same time we'll be going through the proof of messengership of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Inshallah. What if someone said the challenge is in a language that most people don't speak or understand, thus the challenge doesn't seem like it's for all mankind? You can learn Arabic. Arabic is still a living language today. You can absolutely learn Arabic. It's not in a dead language. It's not in a language of a nation that doesn't exist anymore. Okay, fine. Fusha Arabic is something different, but there is nothing stopping you from learning Arabic today. People around the world still learn Arabic. Orientalists still learn Arabic in the same regard. So the challenge is open and it's accessible. You can't argue the fairness of a challenge by, how, what did it fall into your lap or whatnot. You've got to basically put some effort into it. If you don't know Arabic, whose fault is that? You have the ability. The option is there. It's not a closed off option. It's not a limited option. Just go to any institute, learn Arabic, learn Fusha Arabic, spend some time doing it, and you can challenge the Quran. And even if you don't do it yourself, trust and know that other people haven't done. And here's the point that the wider community needs to be aware of, that even if you haven't experienced this miracle for yourself, even if you don't know Arabic yourself, you have to recognize that other people around the world can and do understand Arabic. They have studied Arabic. The people at the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam understood the Arabic. They attempted it, and every single attempt failed. And all you have to recognize is that there is no evidence, there is no basis anywhere in the history of mankind from the revelation of the Quran until now where anyone has matched this challenge. And that's what you need to be paying attention to, that if nobody else has matched this challenge, unless you think you're some kind of a super duper special genius, in which case learning Arabic should be easy for you, you have to recognize that if all of mankind has failed, you're probably going to fail at this too. And then you need to recognize the Quran as for what it is, which is of divine origin, the divine speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So is the miracle of the Quran, well, we say the miracle, this is a miracle, the Quran, there are several different, it's like a diamond. Let's just say it's like you can look at it and you can turn it and see something new every single way. So this one, I prefer arguing this case, the preservation of the Quran, as a miracle, because it's the one that requires, in my personal opinion, it's the one that requires the least dependency and reliance upon any third-party factors. Because if I was to give you a lecture on the balagh, the eloquence or the speech of the Quran, that would necessarily require the audience to understand sophisticated high-level Arabic to be able to appreciate what I'm actually saying. Or if I was to give miracles of prophecies and whatever have you, you would have to understand that that's, certain other things to appreciate those and to understand why it was a prophecy at the time, yada yada yada. Whereas this preservation of the Quran, and even then, if there was a prophecy in the Quran, here's the other thing: even with the prophecies in the Quran or the scientific miracle or so-called scientific miracles or whatever have you, all those demonstrate is just that those statements in and of themselves may be the truth. The point here is, with the preservation of the Quran through this one argument, you can argue that the Quran as a whole is of divine origin. So, what about this ayah here, Qul huwallahu ahad, or whatever have you? How do you know that that's of divine origin, whatever have you? Because it's contained within the Quran. And if anything like that, if there was any chink, any variance in the Quran, anything that was introduced by man or whatever have you, that would provide a chink in the armor where other people could replicate that and say that, well, okay, I've matched the Quran now, and the challenge would fail. The fact that no one has come close to anything anywhere in the Quran full stop, verbatim, demonstrates that the Quran as a whole, everything within the Quran, is of divine origin rather than any individual statements. Does that make sense? But yeah, so that is one of the miracles of the Quran, and I think it's the most all-encompassing and easily accessible, because you don't even have to understand Arabic to recognize and appreciate the point. You just have to just from this argument alone, you should be able to recognize that if Muslims are memorizing and reciting the Quran around the world, especially in this month of Ramadan now, you can go to any masjid in the evenings, listen to the Taraweeh prayers, and you will certainly find there someone who has memorized the entire book from start to finish and can recite it for you. Well, they're not going to there and then because it takes hours, but the point is they have the ability to do so. And the fact that we have the ability around the world to do so demonstrates that it's preservation. Because, I mean, think about it as well. Can you memorize the Bible? Well, no, you can't, because if you start reciting it and you come against someone else, on the opposite side of the world and start reciting to him, he'll say, well, it's not this word, it's that word, right? Whereas, with the Quran, you can have two people who have memorized the Quran on opposite end of the world recite to each other, and they'll agree with each other, and they can correct any mistakes But the point is, there won't be any discrepancies between them then. Falsification test pertaining by contradictions in it. Can one argue it's inimitable since speech taking over 23 years is impossible to be free from contradiction while discussing multiple topics? You could, yeah, you could try and argue that. I mean, you could, yeah, you could. I mean, it doesn't. The 23 years, I would argue, is not even a factor. Is because don't get there are places in the Quran where let me try and think of an example. There was think of an example. So the Quran states things in different, like for example, let's just think of the prohibition of alcohol, which came in 3 different stages, which is one that they ask you the good and the bad of it, there's bad in it, and then the next is that don't come to Salah in a state of drunkenness, and then the final one is that it's discussing and basically to stay away from it, right? The 23 years is not necessary. Just even producing something of that volume to not have any contradictions in it, in and of itself, is something beyond the productive capacity of man. Because again, find a book, find a novel, find a story, find any kind of a book that hasn't undergone severe revisions. The Quran is still on revision 1. There's no instances of, oh, okay, wait, let's change this ayah now to that and whatever have you. There's no multiple different revisions, or this is the final version, whatever have you. Once the ayah was revealed, that was it. It was pretty much, it's set in stone. It's done. So again, that in and of itself, to produce something of that voluminous nature without mistake, without contradiction, that's the miracle. The fact that it happened over 23 years is neither here nor there. Hope that makes sense. Okay, I think if we are done with the questions, because we are getting close. Jazakallah khair. We're getting close to Asr time. So let's call it a day then. And so inshallah, this will be up on YouTube, unless you're already watching on YouTube, in case. Assalamu alaikum. And we'll see you tomorrow, next time, inshallah, at 3 p.m. for the proof of messengership of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So jazakallahu khairan for your attentive listening. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. And please do share the khair, let people know, and invite others to watch and engage with this live, and also share the link to the YouTube videos once they're up as well. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.